webinar series. This is Jeremy Martin, Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at the Institute of the American. Delighted and pleased that we've been able to arrange for Jorge Araujo from CFE to join us today and make a presentation as part of our webinar series. And indeed, Jorge will share with us what he's calling CFE on the right track. We've sort of given it the title of CFE's transformation in the Mexican electric market. I don't need to remind anyone on this webinar today how important and how dramatic and transformational the energy reform in Mexico has been, obviously for the entire segment of the electric sector, but particularly for what it's meant for CFE and the evolution at CFE, the unbundling into several companies, and just the overall transformation of CFE into Empresa Productiva del Estado. So I don't want to take too much time. Just a quick reminder of the webinar series agenda for those of you who may not have joined us before. So we'll have a short presentation, a short introduction that I'll make, and then the formal presentation by Jorge, which we will allow him to make. And during the course of his formal presentation, we invite you to contribute any questions or comments you have by way of the chat function that we have. And I see that some folks have already availed themselves of the chat function, but we'll use this eventually for the question and answer portion of the webinar, which we'll have, and we'll hold the questions until the end of his formal presentation, but that doesn't mean you have to wait to pose your question. So you see that I've just typed the word question into the chat function. So again, if you have any thoughts or comments, questions during the course of his remarks, please go ahead and put them there, and we'll get to them after he's done with his formal remarks. And then we'll try and, like I said, get to everyone's questions. So, you know, early bird gets the worm. So first in line, well, there you go, David. Thank you. So I also wanted to just quickly remind folks, I usually do this at the end, but if you'll just humor me real quickly about some of the upcoming events we have, just so we can share that before we get started today. We have another webinar as part of our series, first one in October, next Thursday, October 4th, about digital technology in the oil and gas sector. Should be a fairly narrow but a very interesting topic. And then I want to invite everyone who's on this webinar today. I think this event we're going to be hosting in partnership in Mexico City together with Anuyes, Equitable Origin, the Mitsubishi Foundation, and some others, a business case for community engagement, getting prior consultation right in Mexico. It will be an event that's hosted at the Anuyes facilities in Mexico, and it will be very interesting. So check out our website for further details on that. I think it's something we would encourage a lot of you to just think about joining us. It'll be a very interesting conversation. So just thank you for letting me mention those. And of course, also we have a roundtable that we're going to be organizing in Colombia, 2 days, oil and gas, as well as energy transition and electric market developments in Colombia, especially as the Duque administration has taken over there. But today we're going to talk about Mexico, and as I said, this event will be focused on CFE's transformation and CFE on the right track. And we're very pleased that Jorge Araujo has been able to join us. Jorge has worked at CFE for many years. He currently holds the position of Managing Director, Head of Project Finance, Engineering, and Construction. He's held that position since 2016. Prior to that, he served as Chief of Staff to the previous Director General, Enrique Ochoa, at CFE. He's a civil engineer from Iberoamericana in Mexico City, has a degree from the University of Texas, has several degrees actually, as well as an MBA in Finance, a Master's of Science from the University of Stuttgart. And has a background, I think, that's quite interesting, not just in engineering, but in finance. And so really brings together engineering and finance. And I think that's so important for today's power market developments. And so I don't want to take any more time. I want to thank you again, Jorge, for joining us this morning, this afternoon, Mexico City time. And we'll turn it over to you to present your remarks and your presentation. And we'll come back at the end and have a conversation and discussion with any questions or comments from the participants. Thank you again, Jorge, for joining us. Look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jeremy. I hope that everybody hears me well. So I have a presentation that, if I may ask, just Jacqueline, you can put it up on the screen. That'd be great to guide us through.
Jorge, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it seems we're having a little bit trouble hearing you. I don't know if if you're using a microphone it seems you're a little bit far from the microphone. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, give me a second. Let me. Is it better?
Yes, it's a little bit better. It's still a little bit far. I don't know if you can move closer or if there's something. Let's see if we can adjust that a little bit, please. Thanks.
Is it possible to put in the presentation? I hope that now you can hear me better.
Perfect. Very good. Thank you so much.
Jeremy, is that okay?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you so much. That sounds perfect.
Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes, please go ahead, Jorge. That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So
Thank you so much.
I have a few slides here I'd like to share with you. Okay, and I'll just step right in. Okay, so title of my presentation, as you say, is CFE on the right track, and I just want to give some context of what's happened in Mexico and why the reform had to be. You guys can hear me?
Unfortunately, I don't know what changed, but you were perfect, and then when you started to deliver, it dropped off.
I'll carry on. I'm pretty much stuck in hearing with the microphone. Okay.
That right there is perfect. Whatever you're doing is perfect.
Okay, I'll keep it right there.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, so why the reform had to happen? So I'll give you this context of what was going on before the reform, and then what happened, and then what we've done about it, and some of the results we have seen in the last few years. Okay, so a little bit of context. So in 2012, just to put into perspective, where electricity rates were the industrial rates in Mexico vis-a-vis the industrial rates in the US for electricity. As you can see, overall, it was at the national level, and Mexico was about 84% above the US uh, in electricity. So mainly, we can see that parts like Texas was pretty high, California was still higher than Mexico was higher than California, and in Florida as well. So this in context sets a scene of what was going on in Mexico. Electricity rates were pretty high in Mexico back then. So also, what was going on in the natural gas space? In 2012, the gas pipeline system in Mexico was pretty small. As you can see, whatever had as a system back then was, first of all, not a national interconnected system. It was a series of gas pipelines, as you can see there on the map. It was about just under 12,000 kilometers of gas pipelines that did not reach the entire country. So it was only reaching certain parts of the country, but it was not enough to cover the entire span of the country. To put this in context, in the U.S., the pipeline system existing in the US is already 43 times larger than that system that existed in Mexico in 2012. Even the state of Texas alone was about 8 times larger than the Mexican system at the time. So
Jorge, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I don't know what happened. It seems that when you
raw gas. Hello?
yeah, it seems that for some reason when we get the microphone set and then you start to deliver, I don't know if you've moved it. There's something happening that makes it too low to hear.
There.
That's perfect. Whatever you're doing right there is perfect. So that's very loud and clear. I think if you can keep the microphone just like that, that would work very well.
Let's keep it that way. Whenever I talk to you, it works well.
Yeah. So what? Please. Yeah. Sorry, but people were having a very hard time hearing, so I wanted to make sure we didn't lose anyone here.
Okay. So I hope you guys now can hear me. What I was saying is that the natural gas pipeline system in Mexico was not big enough. And we had to do something about it. On the technical and non-technical losses of electricity, as you can see in the graph, we had a big issue. We had losses of about 15% back in 2012, when the OECD averaged about 6%. And this spiked back in 2009 when CFE took over the central area of Mexico that was serviced by Luz y Fuerza. Also, our CO2 emissions related to the use of fuel oil was skyrocketing. We had close to 94,000 tons daily of CO2 emissions related to the use of fuel oil, which was around the use of 11 million vehicles by the production of electricity alone. So this is what was going on in Mexico before the reform. Now, to give a little bit of context of what CFE is, and for those who don't know it, well, CFE was created in 1937, so last year we turned our first 80 years, and it started as a relatively small company with only 105,000 clients. Now, 80 years later, we have around 42 million clients, 186 power plants, of which the great majority belong to CFE. We have about 29 IPP power plants that we contracted in the last 20 or so years. Our entire grid is close to 1 million kilometers in length in transmission and distribution, and with a total installed capacity of around 55,000 megawatts. So this is CFE today after 80 years, but it was a vertically integrated company, so it needed to change. Whatever was going on back then, being a monopoly for the last 80 years, worked well up to the point in which it wasn't developing at the fast pace that we needed. And as you can see from the graph that I showed before, we were being inefficient in the use of fuels and in the distribution of an energy mainly. So as you know, in 2013 and 14, the energy reform in Mexico was approved by the federal government. And these had basically 5 main objectives. That was to reduce the cost of the electricity service. That was one of the key drivers. To promote investment in the electricity sector, and to stimulate the growth of clean and renewable energies. Those were the 3 pillars on which the reform was based. and knowing that with competition we will improve the level of the welfare of our society and the and the system as a whole. Now, what's happened with CSV's transformation? Basically, from being a state-owned enterprise, okay, we are now, and with the new mandate that we have, is we're a state-owned enterprise that we have a product that we have to deliver dividends to the state. So before, we used to get a budget on an annual basis and use it, whilst now we have a mandate of profitability. In terms of our commercial attitude towards the market, before was mainly to provide electricity to every single user in the country, and right now as a company we transform ourselves into being an energy company, which means in essence that we're not only focused on the electricity market, but one of the key components that have changed, as you will see in the following slides, is that before we were price takers in the fuels market for all of our power plants. Now we have taken that into our own structure, and we can actually trade the different fuels that we use for our power plants. And as you know, 80% of the production of electricity costs are related to the type of fuel that you use and the cost of it. So by being able to take into our own hands the best trading practices for the use of fuels for our power fleet, this is already a big transformation. Before, we were mainly price takers from the other monopoly of the state, that was Pemex, and that gave us a very low competitive advantage. We were basically at the expense of whatever Pemex wanted to sell us the different fuels at, and the availability that they had for the different fuels for CFE. So we're pretty much at the bottom of the list of priorities, being the other state-owned enterprise and a duopoly. Another big change is from moving from a vertically integrated company to a holding company, to changing to a holding company with 13 new subsidiaries and affiliate companies that, as I'll explain in the following slide, have a sense of competition and a mandate of profitability in each of them. And just moving on the goals, before it was a matter of giving service to all the consumers. Right now, it's for the entire company, we're driven by aiming for profitability indicators and profitability margins for the company as a whole, starting from the business units to the different affiliate companies, as well as the subsidiary companies. So this is how CFE looks right now, from moving from a vertically integrated company to this new structure that I was talking about. So first of all, one of the big changes is that we moved from a Junta de Gobierno, that is a government meeting that happened every couple of months, that was substituted by the board of directors. In this board, we have 4 independent board members that actually are pretty well-known individuals in Mexico for their success in their own private businesses. So they're very well-known and characters that come in and actually are having a very decisive role in the future of the company, as they are really putting forward or putting in front the profitability goals that the company has to aim for. There are another 8 or 9 members that are mainly filled by government officials, but I think that the big strength of the board is the fact of having independent board members that actually move from one administration to the other, so that there is a good governing principle in the company. Now the CEO of CFE reports into the board, and below him there are 5 different directors, one of which, the one that is there surrounded in yellow, is the area that I have. That's it, and under the corporate umbrella, under which we have now, particularly in the generation, it's broken down into 6 GenCos, 6 generating companies, which were given by the Ministry of Energy a specific generation matrix that is not technology dependent. It's basically a mix of different technologies, and it's scattered across the country. The main aim when the Ministry of Energy provided that matrix for each of the GenCos was to give roughly all of these GenCos the same amount of cash flow generation possibilities, so that they were all in a similar condition to start competition in a competitive market. All these GenCos compete against each other in the wholesale market on a daily basis. They have each of them their own CEO, their own board with independent board members as well, and they aim for profitability objectives as well. So that's already a big change from what we used to have. All of these generating companies are subsidiary companies of CFE. On the transmission and distribution, that stayed for the time being under the control of the state through CFE. That's still a monopoly of the state, and the state has given CFE the mandate to carry on those activities with 2 different distribution subsidiary companies. One is CFE Transmission, and the other one is CFE Distribution Subsidiary. So these are the 2 companies that were created. And on the commercial side, that was the other side that was open to competition in the market. So generation and commercialization of energy were open to the market in this reform. In here, CFE created 2 different companies. One that is CFE Basic Supplier subsidiary. This basically caters for all the clients of CFE that have a demand below 1 megawatt per year. So that's pretty much 99% of CFE's clients, so over 41 million clients fall within this category. And a new company, an affiliate company, was created that is CFE Qualified Supplier. And this company is the one that caters for the industrial and commercial clients that have a demand above 1 megawatt of demand a year. It is in this particular space where there are now many other qualified suppliers in the market that are operating today. Probably there are about 20 or 30 companies that have got a registry, and maybe between 5 and 10 that are operating in the market and they have already clients signed up. So that's the main area of competition. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, the Energy Regulatory Commission granted, I think it was 2 or 3 additional permits for basic supplier companies that will start operations most likely next year. So again, competition is open in that area. And finally, we created, as I was saying, in the energy trading part of the business, 2 different companies to cater for the fuel trading for our different GenCos. This is CFE Energía on the Mexican side, and CFE International that is based in the US, and basically it's a sister company of CFE Energía that basically what it does is to carry on trading practices in the US. So with this, you can see we created 13 different companies, of which about 10 of them are subsidiary companies, 3 of them are affiliate companies, and each of them with a different aim. Having all of them, they have to comply with their business plans. They all, in the same fashion as the GenCos, they have their own CEOs, boards, independent board members, and their aim is to maximize profit in their own area of expertise. So that's how CFE looks like today. So carrying on, so how do we work in the new market? In the new market, in the new wholesale electricity market, basically generation companies are participants of this market. The qualified and the basic suppliers are also participants of the market. The SENACE, the independent service system operator, that before the reform was a part of CFE, it's now an independent unit, and they carry on the management of the wholesale market, as well as dealing with all new interconnections and new contracts for new projects coming online. And again, as I mentioned, the Subsidiary for transmission and distribution, they participate also as part of this market, and the SENACE is the one that regulates their operation. Maybe I want to talk about here on what happened before the reform and after the reform in terms of who was doing what and what are the main changes that happened pre-reform and on how we're operating today. So the biggest changes, I would see them in generation and in the supply side. And without going into all the details in the slide, maybe just to say that in part of the generation that is open and the whole planning of the system before was done by CFE. So we have the POISE that many of you know, probably heard of it before. That was the planning mechanism for 15 years that CFE was publishing every year with its expansion plans. That changed. Now CFE is a participant in the planning of the overall system, as there are other private entities doing it, particularly on the generation side. But it's mainly SENACE with the Ministry of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission that actually come up with this long-term planning of the electricity system. CFE participates with their input of what we want to do that is aligned to our own business plan. Now we have to provide a business plan to our board that is reviewed every year, and it's a 5-year plan that basically talks about how we want to achieve our profitability objectives in the next 5 years, what investments we're going to do, what's in the different parts of the value chain, from generation, transmission, distribution, commercialization, and so on. And this is updated on a yearly basis, and this is available on our website. If you want to have a look at it, there is a part where you can download the public version of this business plan for CFE. So that was one of the biggest changes, that now we're not part of the overall, or it's not part of our mandate to be the main planners and executors of long-term electricity infrastructure. And I think another big change, apart from the one that I talked about of SENACE being the independent system operator, is the one about in the supply side about tariffs. Tariffs were before set by the Ministry of Hacienda, the Ministry of Energy, and the Energy Regulatory Commission had a small participation in setting those rates, but it was mainly Hacienda and the Ministry of Energy who set them up, and Hacienda had the final say. In this new model, it's the responsibility of the Energy Regulatory Commission to set the rates, to set the tariffs, with some input from the Ministry of Energy. But it really is the task of the Regulatory Commission to set these tariffs. And this is a big change that particularly this year we're seeing now the full impact of what this means. There's been a lot of going back and forth on this, and trying to kind of set these tariffs once and for all. And I hope that we have more visibility on what these tariffs are being, to give more clarity to how the market is going to develop in the future. So with this setup, I just want to give you some of the results that we've gone through in the last 6 years, and what we have done apart from this massive transformation within CFE of moving from the old model into this new competitive model. At the same time, we have promoted the largest and most ambitious electricity infrastructure investment program in the history of Mexico. This overall sums up about $36 billion of $35 billion of investment promoted by CFE in different types of infrastructure projects. First of all, we promoted the construction of 26 pipelines to transport natural gas. This was a very successful effort. At the end, I'll show a map in the coming slides how this changed. But now, pretty much every single state of Mexico will have access to natural gas by the end of 2019. We did some conversion of power plants from fuel oil into natural gas pipelines, into natural gas power plants. We commissioned, we're under construction overall of 24 new power plants, mainly combined cycle power plants. And through the options that I will talk about in a little bit, CFE has been the anchor for 66 renewable power plant projects that came out of the first, second, and third auctions carried out by the Ministry of Energy. Okay, we have carried out over 400 transmission projects and over 13,000 distribution projects in the last couple of years. Here is the map that I wanted to show you. As you can see, in brown you see the old system, and in green you see the layout of the new pipeline system. And it is a very deep change for the country as a whole, and was mainly anchored by CFE power plants to be able to be the long-term off-taker of these pipelines to carry out the projects and to be able to deliver natural gas to most of the country. The overall objective is to reach close to 75% increase of the existing pipeline network. This was an investment of about $8 billion overall, carried out by the private sector, in which CFE was contracting long-term capacity on those pipelines, and we are to fuel our power plants along the way of those pipelines. So in a way, we took on that risk, and it's the private sector that has been developing them, and they will own the pipelines. Again, on the power on new power plants, we have all these projects that are coming online by the end of this year and next year, and overall with a total new installed capacity of over 6.2 gigawatts and around $3.5 billion investment. These were about 2/3 of them were our plants that are going to belong to CFE, so to our new fleet, and about a third, they're still on IPP contracts that are probably the last ones that CFE signed for the foreseeable future. In the old model now, it has to go through our qualified supplier if we want to have this type of long-term PPAs in the new model. What has this meant for the environment? We have reduced our CO2 emissions related to the use of fuel oil by about 40%. And the aim is that by the year 2021, we will have reduced it by over 90%. So basically stop using fuel oil that, as many of you may know, it's about 3 times more polluting than natural gas. It's second best option. In terms of energy losses, we also have a very important investment programming to reduce both the technical and non-technical losses, particularly on the non-technical. On the technical losses side, we had a lot of investment on new infrastructure from transformers, smart meters, and so on. And we are about to reach our goal of reducing at about 1 percentage point a year since we took office, to leave the indicator of energy losses in between 10 and 11% by the end of this year. So thinking that when we started was around 15%. There's still work to be done. The OECD average is around 6%, so there's still work to do in the forthcoming years. But I think that the effort has paid out well, and we're on the right track. We are now below the levels of when CFE took over Luz y Fuerza in the center of Mexico. That basically made our indicator spike. And overall, and these are numbers from September last year, what that meant was that we were able to deliver better and cheaper electricity tariffs to our clients. So overall, coming from Mexico being 84% more expensive on average than the US, by the end of 2017, we were only 24% more expensive. And in some states, as like California or Florida, we were even providing better industrial tariffs than over in the US. Texas still, we managed to reduce it from 86 to about 60, and that shows you what big impact it has, the fact that you have your main fuel readily available, as is the case of Texas, where they have both wind, but particularly natural gas to fuel the power plants. And important just to say here that on the tariffs, the updated numbers would probably look very different, because as I say, it is not since last year that the Energy Regulatory Commission started to change the formulas that they use for the end tariffs. And this year, there's been a bit of a trial and error on their side, which has meant that particularly for industrial clients and commercial clients, the tariff has spiked, and they're working on trying to find the right mix. So what I wanted to show you with the previous slide was comparing pears with pears, or apples with apples, from the beginning of the administration to the last numbers that we had back then when we were using the previous tariff structure. Now, finally on this part, I would like to talk about renewables. That is a key thing of our strategy. In this case, well, CFE still generates 75% of the renewable energy in Mexico. So this number will probably change now that the new projects that come online due to the 3 auctions start to operate. However, we're still the main incumbent in this area. Our main renewable source is hydro. We have a large part of geothermal energy, and wind, and then solar, and these will probably change in in the near future. The aim and one of the key objectives is that it's actually set part of us law due to our commitments to the Paris agreements, is that Mexico is able to deliver 35% of its energy production from renewable sources by the year 2024. So given the auctions, I think that we're on the right track, but there's still work to be done. So as you know, we had already 3 long-term auctions that were very successful. 66 new renewable energy plants are being constructed, and CFE pretty much is the off-taker of all these plants. So although these are developed by the private sector, is very important, and this is a key achievement of the energy reform to actually make a true energy sector, electricity sector, be born and flourish in Mexico. At this point, the main off-taker of all these projects is CFE. So this is how we are contributing to promoting the energy reform, is by being the off-taker for all these projects by new energy companies, by new electricity companies. And the prices that we got, I think it was also a very good result for CFE, mainly that we're buying these long-term 15-year commitments of energy and clean energy certificates at very, very good prices. As you can see from the slide, we got some of the lowest prices in the market on this type of auctions worldwide. And the related investment in this area has been by the private sector of around $9 billion. Finally, there is a final in this administration 4th auction that should happen in the next month to 2 months. Bids are going to be received in October, and we hope that carries on. That is being taken for the first time by the Energy Regulatory Commission. The 3 previous ones were organized by the Ministry of Energy. That was kind of the plan, that they first started with that, and then they transfer that responsibility to the Regulatory Commission going forward. So this is the first one that is organized by the Regulatory Commission, and so far it looks like it will go ahead. So finally, I want to finish up with just some next steps and then open it for questions. I think that from CSP's perspective, the next is to consolidate the CFE transformation. The last 3 years have been about starting that transformation, making it happen, implementing it. The implementation part, I think it's past, and now we're just consolidating that so that we can carry on for the future working in this new manner. Second, I think for the overall market is to finalize all the regulatory framework that is still missing. Just to give you an example, all the ancillary services regulations and the bylaws are still to be published by the Regulatory Commission. So that's part of the stuff that is missing. And finally, to strengthen all the institutions, from the independent system operator to the Regulatory Commission to the Ministry of Energy, so that everybody is, as time goes by, growing in their own strength to have a market that is fully operational and that secures long-term investment for both CFE and for the private sector. So with that, I want to finish my presentation and open it for questions.
Thank you very much, Jorge. I appreciate that. Apologies for some of the audio. It seems once we got it straightened out, everything worked very well. Folks have already begun to put some questions here, but just a reminder that we'll use this function right here. Jorge, before we get into a couple of questions that were posed, I wanted to have you clarify a little bit of the auction process, because there are a couple of questions that have been posed here. You talked at length about the projects and the 66 renewable projects, and CFE as an off-taker. So just explain a little bit more, if you could, how that worked in the first 3 auctions, and how you see it working going forward in terms of CFE, as you said, guaranteeing the success of those auctions by way of serving as the off-taker. Help us understand the process or mechanics of those auctions a little bit, and where CFE, as you said, was the off-taker.
Sure. So there's been already 3 auctions. I'll try to get now the numbers for each of them. So overall, we have of the 3 auctions, have 47 solar plants and 19 wind plants that are being constructed. They will be installed in 16 different countries across 16 different states across the nation. And this represents about 7.6 gigawatts of new installed capacity. So the way it works is CFE basic supplier is the long-term off-taker for this energy that the developers that put their prices in there. They have two components. One is for energy, and the other one is for clean energy certificates. In the first auction, the reserve price was pretty high, was about, I think, $90 thereabouts. And back then, I remember that that the talk was that the price was pretty low, and that it wasn't going to work and so on. And we actually ended up having, on average, prices that were around $48 per megawatt hour, including the clean energy certificates. So the contracts that are signed between the developers and CFE basic supplier are for 15 years. And the developers, they have an amount that they have to deliver to CFE basic supplier. And if they want to do an additional part of their to their park, they will do it. They can contract it outside CFE or put it into the spot market. In the second auction, the prices were even lower, came out at about $33 on average. And the third auction came out at about $21. That at the time was the lowest ever recorded in auction around the world. Now, having this long-term PPA with CFE makes it bankable for developers to be able to fund their projects. It is true that at this point, there are some projects that are not on time and on schedule to be delivered, mainly due to the fact that they didn't have maybe all the permits, or they didn't own the land that they were going to use to develop their projects. So that's maybe hampering a little bit the execution of these projects. Some of the conditions of also the indigenous consultations have taken longer than expected. So all these things are things that everybody's learning from, and we hope that they can get back on track and deliver the projects, even if it's with some penalties further down the line. I cannot hear anything else. So I'll go to some of the questions that I can see here on the chat, saying what is the minimum consumption to be a qualified user? is 1 megawatt a year, the consumption that you need to have. In terms of the number of cells issued in 2018, I don't have the number with me. However, I can say that there is going to most likely be a lack of cells in the market. So some of the companies out there, what they're trying to do is to trade on this and to see the fact that right now, if they can get hold of them in the near future, there's going to be a lack of clean energy certificates. They'll probably profit from speculating in this market. When do you expect budgetary independence from CFE companies? Well, we're working very hard on that. To be honest, it's not a decision that that is taken only by us. However, I can say that in terms of the restructuring and the financial numbers that we're having as a result of the changes that we're making, are looking that in the right direction, that we expect that in the next couple of years, CFE will turn around and we'll have a profitable company that delivers the dividends to the state that it should. And at that point, it will be probably the time to be able to become fully independent. For the time being, we're still working at losses, although in the last 2 years, we have profits to show, but they were mainly the result of the restructuring of the pension scheme of CFE, so that gave us air, and that's what's shown in the last 2 years. This year will probably end up close to flat. So if we carry on with our business plan, we expect in 2019 or 2020 to become sustainable and to be on the profit side. When do you expect CFE to move directly into wind and solar project development? Well, there we have projects that we're looking into here in my division, that we're talking closely with the different gencos to see whether they want to develop them. However, I think that's something that has been very positive. We are getting that renewable energy that we want as a company by being the off-takers, and at the same time the private sector is developing by being the promoters of this. So I think in that respect it's a win-win situation in which we're both getting the best of this new renewable market. So what percentage of the project in the first auction will be completed on schedule? I would say I wouldn't like to speculate on that. We are not, in my area, we're not until recently, well, actually, that hasn't happened yet. We're not monitoring them, so I would need to check with the off-taker how they're doing. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that. How does CFEs compete with the new basic supplier companies? That, I think, as long as the regulatory commission has very explicit and very clear rules about the tariffs and the tariff structure, that shouldn't be a problem. What needs to happen there is that the tariff really shows the level of, so that is not subsidized implicitly by CFE to other basic suppliers. So everybody would need to really charge for the electricity the generation costs and associated costs to the end consumer. So having a subsidized tariff for our competitors, that wouldn't be the best solution, because in a way it's being subsidized by losses at CFE. in the midterm auctions, dates for October, that's what's been planned in October and November to receive all the tender. So the tender, from what I know, and this is not something that we decide, still goes ahead. So if it goes ahead, CFE will participate. What will CFE do to have more diversification of renewables and avoid the problems that a super component of solar creates when all goes out at sunset? Well, in that respect, we're promoting a lot of base load capacity. As I mentioned, we have a lot of new capacity coming online, about close to 7,000 megawatts of new capacity is coming online, and that's mainly base load. So in a way, that's to compensate with all the new renewable projects. So for us, renewable is important. However, we know that we need to have a balance between all that renewable and the base load to avoid any issues, as you say, with when sunset kicks in. Does CFE have plans to diversify sources of natural gas via LNG, or has Mexico CFE made a strategic commitment to U.S. source gas, or is this the road to diversification to occur via renewables? I think on the LNG front, we actually do have a program to import LNG. We have 2 reception plants, one in Manzanillo and the other one in Altamira, and we use them at full capacity. However, it's been a strategic decision for CFE to actually source gas from the US, and eventually, once the full energy reform kicks in on the hydrocarbon sector, source gas from Mexico when it produces gas by the private sector. So our pipelines are sourcing gas coming from the US, and the difference in prices is about 3 times. So gas by pipe is 3 times cheaper than LNG. So in that way, whenever we have to use LNG, is because the existing gas supply on gas pipelines is not enough. So it's all about pricing. And the road to diversification, I think it's a mix. We have to have renewables that we're having through the auctions, and we will self-develop some projects. We have to have base load. We have made a big bet on gas. However, we are developing also hydro projects, and we also rely about 10% of our capacity relies on coal. So I think diversify is a key word here. Not to all source it from one point.
Great. You can keep going, Jorge.
Should we expect a radical change in the CFE infrastructure plans when the upcoming administration comes in December? I think that in that respect, CFE has a long tradition of term infrastructure planning and development. So in that respect, we are already working on projects that we started working on them many years ago, and projects that we received from the previous administration that we carried on this administration were not something that happened overnight. They're part of a planning process, and that's the way the electricity sector works. It's always a long-term planning that works best. Here, we have been doing it for many years, and we expect that to continue. We have a good pipeline of projects, both in transmission and in new power plants, that we hope that we can carry on. As I said, in this administration, it was the largest ever investment in projects, and we hope that in the next coming years, the new administration follows that, and we have enough projects that are feasible projects that I'm working on for already some time, that they can make the best of carry on those plans. So I would say that CFE carries on with its investment process. Is CFE or CFE Energía open to partnering with foreign investors to rehab existing power plants? And the new laws stealing from the market liberalization, even allow equity ownership instead of exiting generation assets. So first of all, CFE Energía deals mainly with fields. It would be mainly with CFE, the partnering part. Yes, we're looking to do that. Actually, in the last couple of years, we have been looking at co-investment opportunities in which there is a shared ownership of power plants. We've been working on that. Internally, we have been working on a whole set of regulations to allow us to prioritize those projects and to work them through different committees and approval process that was non-existent before. Now it exists. Actually, some of those mechanisms, you can find them also on our website. There's an area where you can find the different regulations and of the different committees, and there is one that talks about the co-investments with CFE. So that's something that we're looking to do for new power projects as well as the rehabilitation of existing projects. The incoming administration said it would review all CFE contracts granted since the reform. Which contracts and what does CFE think about that? We think it's a good idea. You know, all the contracts have been awarded in the same way they have been awarded in the past in open tender processes that were carried out in most cases with Transparencia Mexicana. That is the local chapter of Transparency International, as a social witness of all of our contract processes. So I think it's a good idea for them to review them and to see that what they're receiving, they're very well done contracts that have proved themselves not over in the past few years, but these contracts have the model of those contracts started over 20 years ago, and they not only have worked very well for CFE, but also for the financial sector and the banking sector, that they know that they are very bankable contracts. So looking forward for them to have a look so that they feel comfortable that going forward they can use the same models and actually keep on expanding and promoting the projects that they're already installed. Has CFE thought about renewable power integration into the grid? This with flexible power from internal combustion engines and battery storage plants. Particularly for the storage, I am a big believer that that's the next that's the next frontier we have to conquer. For grid management, it's a great idea. Unfortunately, that's one of the parts of the regulation that still needs to be finalized by the regulatory bodies that are working on these manuals and on the market operation as a whole. At the moment, that part of battery storage is still not finalized as part of the ancillary services section that is still in the works. But I believe that once that is finalized, it will be a great opportunity to be able to use that as well as ICS or peaker plants to benefit from market inefficiencies. Where can we find the pricing of the previous CFE auctions? Most likely you will be able to find them at the Ministry of Energy, because although we we didn't conduct the auctions, we're participants in the auctions. We're on the buy side, and in some cases in the sell side. Some of our GenCos actually participated in the auctions, put projects in. Some in the first auction, just to give you an idea, in the first auction we participated with a geothermal plant that didn't get assigned at the auction because our pricing was well off. So we sharpened our pencil, and in the second auction we put in a better price, and we got a long-term contract as part of that result. On the sell side, and on the buy side, we're basically the main buyer. In the first and the second auction, the only one. In the third auction, I think there were a couple of small buyers that came in, and they got allocated small pieces. But in comparison, we were about over 95% or whatever was bought or contracted was contracted by CFE as the off-taker, and then maybe 5% or less by smaller players. So in the Ministry of Energy, to answer your question, is where I think you will find them. Most likely they'll have a section in their website where they can talk about the results of the auctions. I don't know if there are any more questions, and if I missed
Yes,
some,
I think that,
I'm sorry, I was
yeah, I
trying to
think
go
we're
through
done with
the
all the
list.
questions. Yeah.
Jeremy?
Can you hear me now, Jorge? Hello? Hello? Basically, Jeremy had some connection problems. So I think we're done delivering all the questions. And thank you so much, Jorge, for your time and talking to us about the evolution of the company from the state-owned into a holding company. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and everyone who joined us. And we look forward to having you join us in our upcoming programming. And thank you very much to everyone. And thank you again, Jorge.
You're welcome.
And we're going to share the presentation and the recording with everyone. And we'll look forward to having you again soon.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.